Right, number 17. Surface flooding which has not got sediment in it. This is rainwater. No, it's not coming off a hill. Thank you, Chair.
Just to introduce himself, Kevin McDonald, Team Leader, Stormwater and Waterways Asset Planning. And I'm joined today by my team member, Senior Surface Water Engineer, Tom Parsons. We've presented today a report which updates the management of flood waters in Christchurch. To put a bit of context and background around that, this report came out of a resolution from a meeting on the 8th of September, council meeting on the 8th of September, which another report for a specific locality in Christchurch was presented. Council at that time saw it appropriate to add the resolution which took a wider city view of flood management in Christchurch. So as I say this, and as you would have seen from the report, this update presents what approach is being taken and proposed to be taken in the broad sense in managing floodwater planning and implementation of that planning in Christchurch. We don't have a presentation as such for this report, following on from a briefing that was carried out a couple of weeks ago for council. I would perhaps like to just recap with Tom on a few key points that are probably pertinent to some of the matters that might ease for council around long-term plan and of course the current annual plan. So I guess I share a sentiment with my predecessor presenter, Clive, in that in planning for stormwater and floodwater management in Christchurch, I do have a few sleepless nights around that matter because it's far from straightforward, both in terms of getting one's head around the issues that contribute, many of which are legacy issues that, you know, Christchurch being where it is, as was stated by some deputation from Koko Rarata this morning, Christchurch does sit in a wetland area. And as such, and not helped by earthquakes, we have significant drainage challenges. And challenges not just in getting rid of water, but in managing the conveyance of water. And it's in that background, I suppose, that, or to that background, that our approach that Tom and I have presented in the report reflects that it is a complex issue. There are wide-ranging factors that come into play in managing stormwater and floodwaters in Christchurch, and we see that the current frameworks that are in place being around our planning processes, the most formal of which of course are the LTP and the annual plans that fall out of those, they provide a framework which is effective in carrying forward the objectives, I suppose, putting into effect the objectives that councils have put before us in terms of managing floodwaters. The report identifies areas where there are problems, challenges with floodwater management. It also, though, identifies where we have addressed very significantly, particularly since the earthquakes, floodwater management through the expenditure of in excess of $300 million on facilities which and general infrastructure which has greatly improved our management of floodwaters, particularly in regard to floodwater threats to above floor level flooding, which has been established and remains top of the list in terms of our flood management priorities. No matter how far we go in practicable terms in addressing floodwater management, there will always be areas where, because of that factor, Christchurch is low-lying, largely flat, has lost some of its ability to drain from earthquakes, that there will remain to be some of the flooding that we see in localised areas. And there will always be a bigger flood, and the bigger flood will become more prevalent as we see more and more of the effects of climate change. So I'm inclined to open up for questions unless directed otherwise by the Chair.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kelly. And then Tyler.
Thanks for coming along, Kevin and Tom. I'm relieved to hear that you are up at night thinking about this. It shows me that you care, because that's the same way I feel. I used to lie in bed at night when it rained and think about how cosy I was. Instead, now I think about Tenby Place and Newport Street. I guess my question is, when you hear, like we did today, from a group that are profoundly affected by surface water flooding, how is it that a situation as bad as this, with water above knees in the street for 24 hours, how does that kind of get missed? I mean, because it has existed since before the earthquakes, but has kind of got worse, as you would expect. How does that get missed, or did it get missed?
Well, there have been some recent remedial works there, and there is ongoing operations responses to the stormwater that sits in Tenby Place, and the team is well aware of it, both from a planning and operational perspective. So temporary pumping's commonly deployed there to help draw down that stormwater, as was described earlier today. So we have been aware of the issue, and in fact you'll see in the appendix to the report that there is a line item there for Tenby Place and Newport Street indicating a project that's currently unfunded. And part of the reason for that is that it is seen that the works in that area is best delivered in conjunction with the wider Otakorau Avon River corridor works and implementation of stormwater treatment in that area more broadly. We could do some work immediately on that stormwater network, but it might not be as well implemented as it could be, should it be delivered at the same time as the wider work.
Yeah, no, look, I appreciate your answer, Tom, and I do understand that in terms of coordinating that work with other work that's going to be done in the Pirate Park area. And, don't get me wrong, I think the residents really appreciate the fact there's been a bit of attention put onto this, and the staff have been really good at looking at clearing out the drains in the last few months and putting the gate on the outlet into the creek around there. But I guess, it's no comfort to them to know that it might be a few years till it's actually looked at, I see the line item has 1.7 mil suggested to perhaps alleviate this situation. So my second question is how is it that when we have so many issues across the city, how will the priorities be decided? I know you've written a little bit about it, but a bit of clarification around that would be good.
Well,
Around which of the many projects would be
as
clarified.
Kevin mentioned earlier, the first priority is above floor flood risk, and
Sure.
generally that's focused on observed flooding and historic flooding. We do have a lot of stormwater models that we run to assess flood risks across the city, which highlight Tenby Place and Newport Street as one of many locations. And you'll see in the report, we wrote a list of quite a number of streets and areas that have reported or modelled flooding, and that's not exhaustive at all. There are other places as well. So it is a widespread issue. We certainly have focused our past attentions on, since the earthquake, on above floor flooding risk. I'm not saying that Tenby Place is without risk. It certainly is, and that's apparent. Sure. And it is certainly the feelings of the residents are not uncommon for residents across the city who are in similar positions. So I feel for those people. It's absolutely does come with impact, but we do have limited resource that we have to apply, and we do focus it primarily on our understanding of above floor flood risk, followed by underfloor flood risk, then property flood risk, and then if there's anything left over, I suppose we'd start to think about on street. But when floodwater is on street, it's somewhere where it's there generally by intention or design. Sure. Being that we'd much prefer the water to be on the street than in people's homes.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I understand that that the streets are made to take water, but I guess that most of us would think that it would be gone within a few hours. In best case situation, I guess the problem for these people is that at times it stays for a long time because the outlet is below the level which it would drain away, and that causes, I guess, real problems for them. In fact, council has come in and put pumps in there to get the water over the hump, if you like, which have been successful. But unfortunately, some of the neighbours in the area have been perplexed by the sound and have actually turned them off.
The question is what?
Yeah, I think that'll do it. Actually, I don't have another question. But thank you, appreciate it.
I might just add there, in the context of prioritisation, what Tom was referring to is sort of, if you like, the systematic prioritisation process that has sort of been developed over the years. But there is also a prioritisation process that comes into play around particularly LTP, long-term plan. And, to a degree, many of the projects that were in here, and the list you would have seen as the appendix, were originally incorporated into our initial bids for the last LTP. But through the various processes that kick in, including prioritisation and the limits of the resources that Tom mentioned, those, the lid comes down and we have things moved out. And that's another component of that prioritisation.
Thank you. You done, Kel? You are. Tyler?
Thanks. Is that Tim there, is it?
Tom, Kevin and Tom.
I have not said a word this time round.
Kevin,
just saying.
Tom.
Kevin and Tom.
Was it Tom?
Yep.
Okay. Just a quick question in light of the deputation that we had this morning around the permeable surfaces. In your considerations around investigating the networks, is there potentials of exploring those certain technologies? I know the Auckland Council have actually looked at permeable paving too.
Our prioritisation process for stormwater management is based, as I mentioned before, both on observed flooding and flood models. Our flood models don't assume permeable pavements, but it is one potential tool in the toolbox for helping reducing the amount of stormwater discharges from a site.
Okay. I wasn't able to ask the question this morning, but maybe you might be able to answer this around the risks associated with the permeable surfaces around the city. Because I'm sure we have some on our walkways, right, around the tiles, or are they non-porous?
There's some limited deployment of permeable pavers around the city. In some instances, it's used to manage the impacts on trees, for example, to allow aeration into trees as well as for stormwater management. So they are used. It's not necessarily common practice.
Okay, and in light of the new works that happen, I guess the question I've got is, what improvements do get made after those works are complete, and for how long? I know that some people were saying that I've had Some residents say it's lasted around 10 years for those residents, and they say that it started flooding up again. Can you talk to us about the life of these works?
With any engineered system, it requires maintenance, and permeable pavers are no different in that regard. They can blind and block with time. Sometimes vegetation can become an issue. So they do need to be maintained in order to continue to function over their life. But that, as I say, is no different from a stormwater pipe or a pump station. You would expect to undertake ongoing maintenance activities to keep them functioning.
Thank you, Tyler.
Appreciate that. Thanks.
Before Jake talks, our rivers are, we try and keep them nice and clean, but when it rains, we need them to drain water out. Why are we not, or are we dredging the Avon River to the extent that we were before, and downstream from, it's all very well to make the rivers look nice, we just want to get water out when it rains. Downstream from, say, Bassett Street Bridge, that already we have engineered, and this is a few years ago, we've engineered a third of the capacity off the river by bringing one of the banks in. And after the earthquake down there, I was under the impression that on probably both sides of the river banks came in around about 1 metre. I have heard bigger numbers than that, but the river is genuinely narrower. So if we've got a smaller pipe, per se, taking the water out to the estuary or the sea, shouldn't we be trying to make it as clear of obstacles as we can so that the water can get gone, or give it a bit of capacity by dredging it like we used to do constantly years ago?
Well, there are a whole lot of different environmental and engineering considerations that would need to be given to dredging. And wholesale dredging of our rivers hasn't occurred in a very long time since the Drainage Board, as I understand. We did do some specific dredging work and bank stability work on the Heathcote River recently as part of the Land Drainage Recovery Program, so that has occurred. But you need to be very careful, of course, when you're lowering the riverbed, that you don't destabilise the banks. With regards to other work since the earthquake, there has been a lot of what we'd call silt removal from the network and waterways and pipes following removing liquefaction post earthquake. So there's a large program, a lot of work done in that space. But we do try to manage the stormwater as close as possible to the source, and you would see the examples of the stormwater treatment systems work to capture the sediment, much like you heard in the earlier presentations.
Yeah, what I'm getting at is we've got all these nice systems that feed. The only way in Auckland, if water falls on the hill, it's got about 1,000 places it can run down to the sea. In Christchurch, we've got one place, and it's called Shag Rock, and that's how it gets out. It'll go 2 rivers into the estuary, Shag Rock, that's it. Our pipes, our rivers, I feel, especially the Avon, is a bit constricted to what it used to be from what I remember when the Drainage Board were cleaning it out all the time. Have we done some levels on the bottom of the river to know that it hasn't over-silted itself up to a point where it's constricting the stormwater outfall?
Yeah, we do collect data on the bathymetry of the river at given cross-sections relatively regularly, well, on an as-needed basis. We've recently done a bathymetric survey of the Avon River to help inform the works in the RIRC. So yes, we do look at change in the river profile with time to help understand how that is changing and whether or not the bed is changing with time. Now, as I said before, dredging is a complex and can have a lot of different facets, and it would need quite close investigation consideration before we would look to do wide-scale dredging because of its potential environmental impacts, the potential impacts on the banks, and the fact that in most of the lower river stems where the most of the sedimentation occurs, is the flood levels are primarily driven by peak tide. So it's the sea coming in rather than the flood.
I understand that the tide comes in, it holds the river up, because the tide's in. But when the tide goes out, the river can't get out, in my view, fast enough. All I'm saying is that for years, the Drainage Board had a drag line that just went up and down that river all the time and just didn't stop. So I haven't seen one in the Avon River from Kerrs Reach down to, say, Brighton Bridge since the earthquake. So I'm not saying that's the problem. I'm saying, are we making sure that our rivers are real clean, not clean, physically clean, but clean of restrictions to make the water flow out as quick as we possibly can, so there's no restrictions. That's all I'm saying. You don't have to answer it. I'm just putting it. So Jake, please.
The other deputation we had on this issue today around Cambridge Terrace. I just wondered if you had any comment on the flooding situation there.
I would just reiterate the earlier comments about prioritisation and certainly reflect on the impacts that flooding has on people and residents, and they come in a myriad of different forms and scales. There's clearly, from the presentation, it appeared that there were multiple sources of flooding in different instances. Again, I'll just reiterate that we're
so for capital investment, what you're saying is it doesn't meet the threshold for intervention.
Yeah, I had a quick look online during the meeting with one of my colleagues about the location of the local stormwater sump. It didn't appear that some of the stormwater drainage was necessarily ideal in that location, but again, significant capital investment wouldn't be unlikely to be prioritised at this stage, and the wider river response at that location is driven by hydraulics with bridge structures primarily through the central city and runoff. So it would be a challenging thing to address, to say the least.
Thank you, Tom. Are you happy to second this, Jake? Because I'm happy to move it. So second it. Have we got any more questions? No. Got any debate? All those in favour? Aye. Against? Thank you. Carried. Okay.